kind of been closely associated in various ways from, I think, 94 onwards. Sorry, not 94, 2014. Yeah. But I've heard of it. Yeah. And hello, Swati. We both live in the
Hello.
same city, perhaps. I'm Bangalore based.
Yes.
So, yeah. And maybe we briefly met because you look familiar, but I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I am a big documentary film buff. I
Oh, so
mean,
then we would have met because we screen
yeah,
a film every month at as part
at
of Vikalp
Vikalp, is
Bengaluru.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard, I perhaps not met, I mean, seen so many of those screenings, but I've been to so many other screenings and, you know, I've kind of reviewed many documentary films actually and worked with Amadan and probably a few others in videos and documentaries. So anyway, and welcome everybody else who's here. Pleasure having you all. Sort of a busy weekday for many, and then this week, this particular part of the month, apart from of course the lockdown or the post-lockdown, where whatever situation it is, there's I think also many days are very important in the human rights calendar internationally. This particular first 10 days of December, so I know many events are happening. As always, I think many of us are online perpetually nowadays, kind of jumping from one to the other. But wonderful that this is happening. In a way, actually, you know what? This has become very comfortable because, you kind of, it brings you back into focus in a different way. And then, you're comfortably watching and interacting with people worldwide. So that's it's quite an honor actually to ask and talk with you about this film, Swati. And actually, I was getting a few tips from my mother, who's a master's in organic chemistry. So she's learned about dyes and all that stuff. So she was giving me some technicalities on that. Okay. And so we'll zoom right in. Uh, Swati, I don't know if I've done an honest introduction about you. I know that apart from being a filmmaker, you teach at Shrishti.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, later on in the thing, I would like to ask, how filmmaking has changed and how people and students respond to films. Yeah, but right away, start with some of the usual fundamental questions. What urged or made you want to
Make a
create this
film.
film, and
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
this particular one.
So this is several years ago. I had read an article on an elderly dyer uh, from Andhra Pradesh who works with the article said that he works using natural indigo and he uses traditional techniques of dyeing, and that intrigued me. And he seemed to be talking
Mm,
about his process and
mm,
the kind of shades that he could produce with great confidence and sort of joy. And
mm,
like many of us in India, indigo is associated very strongly with the national movement, and you sort of
right,
remember it
right. Mm,
as part of, you remember it as the whoever. Even when I was making the film, people would say, "Oh, the thing for which Gandhiji led a satyagraha." So that's the sort of memory and the association in our minds largely. So this was sort of suddenly a piece of history seemed to be alive in front of me, and I was really intrigued about it.
right.
Um,
Mm,
Apart from that, I'm very, very interested in traditional crafts of India, particularly textiles and the wide variety that you see all across the country in material, crafts processes, um, methods, and therefore the kind of stuff that they produce.
yeah.
Um, of course, after I read the article, different things happened. Some other work comes along and you kind of forget, and it stayed on the back burner for quite a few years. And then this must have been around 2010 or 11, I think, that I decided to visit this place in Andhra Pradesh where this dyer lives. And so I went and met him. And I felt that there was a story to be told here. Um, uh, and I had that time gone with, phones. Even though there were smartphones, they were not what they are now. So, I had gone with
Mm.
something which is called a flip video camera, and it looked very much
Mm.
like a kind of a bulky-ish phone,
Mm.
thicker than what the phones are. And I went with that, and it was like an initial research and recce trip. So I used that camera to sort of film a little bit of the process and of the place where Yellappa, his name is, lived. And I came back, and I was kind of in I was writing up a proposal and trying to raise money for it. And while I was doing all that, I heard that Yellappa had passed away. And I was distraught, because I just felt so stupid. I felt like, I had just sat around doing nothing. And here was this, I knew he was elderly, and I just felt very foolish, and I didn't know what to do. And then, but gradually I spoke to many others, and I eventually decided to make a film as a tribute to him. So that's how the film came. And then, of course, when once you decide to make a film, you do your research, and then the subject kind of expands, and various stories start to come in. And then it's a huge struggle to try and figure out what stays in and what doesn't stay in. And given that, short films are such a sort of they're so popular now, and so many people seem to be making such good short films, it was a bit of a, how should I say, risk to make a slow paced long feature length documentary. But I made a decision to do that because I felt that the subject needed that kind of pacing. am I can Have I got locked out, or is...
No, we can hear you, Swati.
Oh,
We
so
can
I
hear
think it is Pushpa who seems to have frozen.
right. Suddenly we can't see her picture.
Yeah, she seems to have been.
Ha, ha.
I don't know.
So,
Amudan, you want to, or if anybody else wants to say anything, I think.
is it too early to ask Swati a question, Amudan? While Pushpa returns, is it okay to ask her a question? Ah, yeah, she's back. She's back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who is Lenovo YT3? I can't make out. But Dilshad, is that you?
No, hi, sorry, I'm back.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry about that.
Thanks for
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Dilshad here.
Yeah. Hi. Hi.
So good
Yeah.
to see you. Yeah. Pushpa, you can continue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, sorry. Was she going to talk, or should I continue?
No. I had sort of... yeah, we didn't know whether you were going to join back immediately. So, but yeah, please
No,
go
no, no,
ahead
no,
with
no.
your
Yeah.
questions. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what. Really sorry about that. 1 second. Huh? Okay. Yeah. So, actually, you kind of answered part of my question. I think it also helps that you have a background in history, right?
Yes.
That you actually kind of dug deep. And yes, there is a very emotional connection between Indigo and perhaps people who know some history of the freedom movement and all that.
Yes.
And I don't know, coincidentally, yesterday or day before, I was returning from with a friend from IISc. And I saw, in Matikere, since Bangalore, there's some small restaurant or something which says flavors of Champaran. So I don't know what it means even.
Yeah.
Okay.
Champaran today has not the slightest trace of indigo left there. It was
correct. Yeah.
Because it was so exploitative. What was happening then? That after one was, of course, the Satyagraha, which brought about the, which got rid of that system where they paid a third of what they made,
Right.
where they had to commit a third of their land to growing indigo. at least.
Yeah,
That was
true.
in law, but
Yeah,
in actual practice,
Yeah.
it was often much more. And once that system was abolished, they just stopped growing it. And it was because the fear was so much, they just wanted to never have to do anything with indigo again. You know, it was that sort of a reaction to it. So they stopped, and then by then synthetic indigo had arrived, and you know it was not a profitable trade anymore. So even the British planters who had sort of lingered on, all gradually began to leave, and you have many abandoned meal kothis in that region.
Yeah. Actually, which would have been quite lost in some ways, perhaps for one or two generations, because from what I've seen, and I know a little bit about weavers and all that. Actually, hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, it's supposed to be a family thing, right? And it's a generational thing. And any of the kind of craft or trades, right?
I'm sorry, I'm losing you in between. You're kind of not clear. I think Pushpa is having connectivity issues, Amudan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. D. Sang, somebody wanted to ask question.
Gauri wanted to ask a question.
Gauri, please go ahead, Gauri.
Yeah.
Gauri, please ask.
I'm just typing it on the side in the chat.
Okay.
So did you get my question, Swati?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So, so what I was asking was, you said that, in Champaran, particularly in one generation or something, they had to commit to indigo cultivation. Actually, some of the revolt was also against that, right? That they
Not
had
in one generation, for several generations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was for 2 centuries, no? I mean,
British had imposed it.
Yes.
So which means that their indigenous or other traditional skills of even farming some other crop or something would have been sort of wiped out, right? So that would have been one. Plus also that like for instance, now I'm kind of going in a slightly non-linear way. The people in Gujarat, the Khatri family and the Ismail or something, the older person, they were saying that synthetic dyes are a problem, plus their inability to cater to the urban market till kind of the government intervened and sort of helped them come up to speed on that. So they're so kind of in a way deep into their own form or their own way of doing things, which is great in some way, because as we are losing traditions and traditional arts and crafts and traditional professions, on the other way, unfortunately, some of them cannot adapt to modern needs, demands, whatever, right? So in a way, you think that their livelihoods are also badly affected?
Are you talking about the Khatris in particular or craftsmen in general?
No, I'm talking about what happened with the indigo not just the cultivators, but the indigo dyers and the indigo.
I'll answer that, and also Gauri has posted a question, so I'll also answer that. So in a sense, as far as the story of indigo goes, after that satyagraha and after the coming of synthetic indigo, it sort of it seemed to kind of have disappeared from the stage, so to speak. Nobody was talking about it. It didn't seem to come up in any of the stories. But what actually happened is that, like I said, the trade had become no longer profitable because it couldn't compete with synthetic indigo. So many indigo planters, British indigo planters, began to abandon the trade and just go away, They switched to something else, or they simply abandoned and went back to England. there were, while most of the indigo plantation during colonial times was in Bihar and Bengal, it was also there in other parts of the country, for example, in Tamil Nadu. And it is only, so there are two aspects to it, right? One is the growing of indigo and the other is the processing. So the growing of indigo continued in this very small way in some corner, little pocket of Tamil Nadu and Andhra through these sort of 100 years, so to speak. Yeah. And therefore, the dyeing too of indigo continued in a small way. The only people who were doing it was Yellappa in Andhra, and there were many dyers in Gujarat, Rajasthan, in fact, all over the country, who knew at one point how to dye using natural indigo, but who gradually forgot because synthetic dyes kind of came by the 20s, late 20s, early 30s, perhaps by the 40s. Synthetic dyes came and sort of just replaced natural indigo. Synthetic indigo replaced it everywhere. But in some little small pockets, some little work kind of was going on. And an example of that is Yellappa. When it comes to dyeing, and when it comes to growing, an example of that is the people you see in Tamil Nadu who are growing it. So this farmer Anbalagan, who talks to us, is his grandfather worked in one of these indigo factories, and then these factories were abandoned, but he knew the work, so he kind of continued to do it. And that's how this one person continued. There are a couple of others, but they only grow, they don't process. He's the only one who processes at this scale. So therefore, in a sense, while these little things continued, uh, uh, the story is kind of, it's almost like cut to 100 years later. Gauri, I don't know if that sort of answers. And what was happening in between was just this, that it was happening in a very small way. It didn't sort of feature anywhere. Even now, if you look at the crops that are grown in Tamil Nadu, it doesn't feature in the list of crops grown anywhere. It's still that small. But before this, it was even smaller. It was really just these one or two farmers who grew and a few dyers here and there, and they seemed to have found each other and they knew each other through their traditional craft connections. And Anbalagan, for instance, he used to travel to Karnataka and to sell it to the people in Guled Gudda where the Ilkal saris are made. And there was this one farmer in Kadapa district who used to grow it and who used to supply it to somebody like Yellappa.
Okay. So great. I mean, kind of in a, nutshell, you've summarized in some ways, different things, the connections between, the farmers, the cultivators, rather the dyers, and also the weavers, perhaps. But, I just want to ensure that the question is answered before I move slightly, change track. That's why. Gauri, perhaps you can even speak up.
So what kept them going and demand from whom? So at that time, the demand was local.
Right.
The demand was local. The Ilkal sari that was made in Guled Gudda was sort of, was a little more popular beyond Ilkal, but it was still not what it is today. And even what Yellappa made, they just sold it locally. So that was the demand, that it was just that very small local demand. And what kept them going really is really what is fascinating, because there doesn't seem to be any great commercial reason that kept them going. What kept Yellappa going was that he just didn't want to give up what he knew how to do. He didn't want to give up. So even when he had to dye with chemical colors, he kept a vat going.
Right. Yeah, actually, sometimes for them, it's not even the commitment, the commerce, but it's more than that. It's like a passion. It's like life to them, right?
Yes.
It is like that with perhaps any artist or any craftsperson. I mean, so for so many of us, you're a filmmaker, I'm more of a writer and partly a photographer. And when we do that, I think often it's about the need to express or, kind of keep yourself occupied with your most favorite work, right? It's not about what comes from it. You don't think of productivity and all that. I mean, that comes later, perhaps, unfortunately, when pragmatism strikes. So, yeah. And I think we see that in even the weaver originally who says that I was just wearing a lungi and then someone saw me and stopped and asked me to do it. And in a way also he was slightly sad, obviously, because, yes, it was also a challenge that he has to know how to make that new design or the design which he's not used to. Because I think for many of them, their traditional craft is something they're very proud of and they hold very dear, right?
Yes.
So that is the thing. And maybe this is coming out of some ignorance. This is my next question. The people who die, they are also the weavers, right? It's kind of interlinked, no? Or some people exclusively do the dyeing and also some
so
do the
earlier
weaving,
there
right?
there has always been a communities of dyers in India,
right?
And they are known as sort of Rangres and Rangari in different parts of the country. In Karnataka, they are known as Bandagaru. The people who color.
Banna is like
Banna is
right,
color,
right.
so Bandagaru.
Correct. Yeah.
Indigo always had a different community that worked with it, because indigo was always a little different from other colors. It has always been it's sort of set apart by its processes,
Right.
So there has been there has been a community of dyers, but so for instance in Andhra Pradesh there's a community called Neeli. Today, no member of the Neeli community has anything to do with dyeing. So that traditional dyeing has gone. But what also happened in India is that because dyeing and weaving are so closely linked, there were, so even Yellappa, for instance, in his Uravakonda, he was a dyer. But there were weavers in the village, and he would go to the homes of all these weavers, and there were vats in the weavers' homes.
Yeah,
and he would maintain the vats there. And he would maintain the vats, he would dye their yarn for them, and he would give it to them. So dyeing and weaving have always been closely linked, even though the communities are different. And when you talk about a revival, in the process of revival, many weavers took up dyeing as sort of, they incorporated dyeing as part of their work. Because then they didn't have to, if they wanted natural dyes, then they didn't have to depend on anybody else. They did it themselves.
Yeah, and also I think they needed to know the technicalities of each other's work, right? Like which fiber, like between wool and cotton, which would retain or absorb more, how much to add, some other substance like, I can't help referring back to my mother again. We were discussing about the acidity, alkaline, this thing, because towards the end of the film, the person talks about how much lime you should add, the pH balance and all that. And so she was saying, yeah, of course, because, you can't have acidic dyes that will automatically ruin the fabric. And that's what they said about wool, right? And, you have to be very careful. And also, I think the other point about how, you were talking about, yes, these people are interlinked, but I think when this whole synthetic thing comes in, either the synthetic dyeing, the synthetic dye itself, the ingredient, the dyeing process, the whole mechanization, the automation of it. And of course, we know that there is automated or mechanized weaving, right? So I think everybody takes a hit. it's like, in the entire chain, right? Right from the cultivator to because again, prices which are falling and rising based on, various other factors. So I think so. I mean, somehow, do you think, or maybe you saw it also, that this whole synthetic dyes and the whole mechanization in some way upset not just the balance in the relationship, but also their survival? Because repeatedly they keep talking about synthetic dyes, and while it is cheaper, there are other issues with it and stuff like that. And how does that impact the weavers, right? Have you seen that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a sort of a large question, but the thing is that yes, it see, the coming of synthetic dyes, of course, put the dyers who were working with natural dyes had to just switch to working with synthetic dyes. That's what happened to the dyers. The weavers started to get synthetically dyed cloth, and so they started to work with it. There's an overall sort of, I mean, this is part of colonial history, but there was a very systematic breaking down of all the trade guilds by the British, and the weavers and dyers and spinners, there's an intervening thing of
Right.
spinning there was so much hand spinning.
Sure. Yeah.
And these were all geographically next to each other, so
Right.
It's not surprising that Telangana, where I have shot, it's almost the border of Maharashtra. You kind of cross the Godavari and you go into Vidarbha region, which is a cotton growing region.
Growing area,
and Telangana is also a cotton growing region. So it's not a surprise that the cotton growing regions also had the spinners, and it had the weavers, and then the dyers kind of grew around them.
Yes.
So all that chain, the interlinking chains, were broken by the British, because they wanted to take the cotton to Lancashire and bring finished goods back. That is colonial history. One would have thought that with independence, better sense would have prevailed. But unfortunately, that did not happen, and the same thing continued.
Right.
And despite efforts by people like Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay and she really sparked off this sort of revival movement in the country.
Right.
The policies didn't change. So, for instance, the mills are in Mumbai, the cotton grows somewhere else, and it cannot be transported as it is. So it has to be compressed, and it has to be baled. Then it has to be sent to the mill. Then it has to be fluffed back again. Cotton, I mean, it's adding processes. It is taking away the quality of the material. So there are many problems with that. But it's happening on such a large scale that I don't know from what point one can sort of start to question it. The only thing is that you can never say that why do we have synthetically dyed and mill-made cloth. It's here to stay, and that is what is meeting the needs of
I
a bulk
agree.
of the population. The point is that government policies have also been such that, I mean, it's a little bit like organic farming and organic food.
True.
Okay. So people would like to eat organic food, and there's such a thing about grow organic farming, grow organic food, but there's a subsidy on chemical fertilizer by the government.
Agree.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. Even now, weavers and have been agitating because they want to be recognized, or there are various ways in which you can protect what they do. If we do accept this as part of our intangible cultural heritage, then one has to sort of put some policies in place. And it's not just about protecting heritage. For all these people, it's a dignified way of life. Because if you do not do what you were trained to do and what gives you joy and dignity, what is it that you can do? You can go to the city and work on a construction site. That's what you end up doing. So it's not just to try and protect something pretty. It's
Correct,
also
correct.
to give people the dignity that they have had.
Correct.
And needless to say, I mean, why is Gauri has written that indigo is cool and really part of high-end fashion. Why have natural dyes become cool today? Because the very same Europe which introduced most of the synthetic dyes that sort of came into the market has today banned many of those synthetic dyes, because synthetic dyes are one of the most polluting industries.
Correct. Agree completely. Yeah. I mean, right from, and even the water and so much other, and also, the way, even in the natural this thing, because unfortunately, see, there are two things actually in this whole issue. Protection of heritage or their skill, their dignity, and also for fundamentally their livelihood. And many of them do not bother or do not even think that they should know an alternate livelihood or develop another skill, because this is something which just gets passed on from generation to generation, right? It's almost like eating and whatever, sleeping. So, and also I have seen actually, I mean, I had visited, I kind of hail from Andhra, Telangana, and have grown up in Chennai. So luckily I was able to follow most of the language without seeing the subtitles, both all the Telugu and Tamil. So, but I had visited some weaver colonies in, East Godavari district. I did not know there are actually. And then this whole how, this master weaver, the bondage and all that, and they're all Dalits, kind of literally on the outer edge of the villages or the hamlets. And so, I think somewhere this whole thing of, because of everything getting mechanized too quickly for them to even understand, and this whole synthetic thing and whatever, yes, it's feeding the market and all that, but there is no time for them to adapt, for them to kind of learn, right? So in a way, their dignity is affected also even in their own area, like, I mean, in their own location, because they're at someone else's mercy, right? So I think you might have seen that happening with the dyers also, right?
Well, actually, I mean, yes and no. See, dyers and weavers adapt very well.
Okay.
They adapt very well. They adapt to new techniques. They innovate. They bring in new things. I don't. I mean, I don't know whether there's another way of looking. The point is that the interlinking things that sort of take what they make to a market have been completely destroyed.
Right.
So today, if they want to sell what they make, they need the intervention of either an NGO or the government, because their local market no longer exists. The local market no longer exists. It is now this niche market, like Gauri has written, indigo is cool and high-end fashion.
Yeah,
so
true.
the chemical and organic, are they running neck and neck with each other? Well, not really. The organic and the handmade remains a sort of a niche area. There is a growing demand, particularly from abroad. So somebody like Anbalagan is expanding his work, and he is exporting his indigo to different parts of the world. So there is that kind of, I mean, there is an increase, certainly. But it remains a niche area.
Correct.
If you look at it as a market, it remains a niche area. So I don't think that it's really about craftsmen not being able to adapt to mechanization. I don't know whether that is really the thing to look at it, but uh, uh, but you see, it's not just innovating your ongoing processes. It is completely taking away the thing from you and somewhere else. It's not about, because they all innovate and they mechanize in their own way.
Yeah, so thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, that is what actually, yeah, like anywhere, any thing, if they're forced to, sometimes they would adapt rather than perhaps go and then migrate and do kind of construction labor or something, right? So, but the point is that, it's also about what the people in Gujarat, the dyers said, right? About how, or even earlier, I think Yellappa's family was when I said about, no, much earlier actually, about how the price differences in the synthetic versus the natural dye, right from the obviously, the cultivation, so that might be seasonal, soil, very location specific, and then transportation also, like you said, like it happens in the cotton thing. So I think that, plus also this whole thing about, see, unfortunately or fortunately, when there's this whole global demand for something, right? So my worry was more, or my question came from more, not their inability or the ability to adapt, but the speed at which they are expected to do that. Plus also, as if like it's kind of completely replacing, this, whether it's synthetic dyes, whether it's mechanization. Like, for instance, right at somewhere at the beginning, it said the people in Tamil Nadu, they say, earlier we used to do it using our hands and legs, and now there's a motor to do it. They keep repeating that point. So my question is coming mainly from that space or that line, that kind of this synthetic dyes, mechanization, how much it has usurped, their whole way of doing things, right? And
but I don't think that it's quite like that. You see, the mechanization, they might introduce further mechanization in their processes.
Okay.
I don't see that as a thing, because you see, I mean, I don't know, but it's like, there are dishwashers now in India, yet
right,
a large majority of people do have somebody coming in and washing their dishes.
Definitely.
There is something to be, there has been a culture of sort of doing things manually in this country. I don't know whether one needs to defend it at any level at all. There is a thing of doing manual work, not just by getting it done from someone else, but doing it with your own hands. To do things manually has been a way of life. It's not, so I don't know whether one needs to defend it at that level. The thing is that whether you do it manually, whether you do it through a motor, unless you bring in a computer and write algorithms that will figure out whether the color has reached the sort of, the intensity of the thing that required. No, there you need a person. It's a person who's going to decide that. Who takes that thing up, he looks at it through that thing and decides that it's color. When I was filming, he told me, "You're lucky today." He said, "Today it's very good color." It depends on the leaves. It depends on the sun. It depends on the. So I don't think that, I mean, I think that, mechanization will come and it will come further and they will even adapt, but that skill is required. And that skill will go away unless that skill is nurtured.
Yeah.
It is really that. Whether it's the skill of making the dye, whether it's the skill of dyeing, or whether it's the skill of weaving.
Right.
And craftsmanship has to be nurtured.
Yeah, sure.
So because and if it is nurtured, it will continue.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know, but that's how I think that we need to look at all these crafts, because it's not the textile industry, the synthetic and the mechanized textile industry is in distress today. It's a myth that crafts need subsidies and protection. No, the textile industry has asked for a huge subsidy from the government. So it's a myth. I feel that that's not really true. I mean, they do struggle because they don't have markets to link them, and that is where we need help, whether through the government, whether through NGOs. But once they have that, And the other thing is that no handmade work can ever be at the scale of machine made mass
Mass
production.
production.
That can
Sure.
never be.
I agree.
So
Completely.
it just,
Completely.
I mean, in a
Yeah.
sense, the philosophy of handmade is also, in a sense, trying to tell you, don't consume so much. You don't need so much.
Mm.
That is
Yeah.
embedded
Yeah.
in the philosophy of the handmade. You know.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I just, there is a question here, which I don't know. Sorry, Pushpa. Can I answer a question which is here in the?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually good if
Yeah.
others also interact. So, I'm glad that
so
people
one
are.
is Dilshad's question is the younger generation enthused about continuing with their ancestral art craft, or is it nostalgia for the older generation? That's one. And the other thing is about, there was a question about, that's Gauri's, no, about water heavy. Okay. So Dilshad,
Yeah.
the younger generation of craftsmen in many places are trying to just get out and get to the city and
Mm.
have a modern way of living, because it's the same
Right.
with farming and it's the same with
Exactly. Yeah.
craftsmen, because farming and craft work requires a different way of life. It requires a commitment that is almost ongoing. You can't ever say that I will just shut shop for 15-20 days and go away somewhere. I mean, you can do it if you have a large family working, then you can sort of take turns to take a break. But they
Breaks
also
or
want to come
something.
to the city, they want to live a modern urban life. So there is that. Secondly, they see the struggle of their parents. And I also think that we don't, as a society, uh, validate that way of life and value that way of life enough. We want the crafts to continue so that we can go to a craft bazaar and buy an organically dyed and hand spun and hand woven material. But I don't think as a society we really value uh, that way of living, including farming. So
Yeah.
So I feel that applies to both. Uh,
Sure.
there are, of course, in some places, like if you look at the Khatris, they are very much in it. The younger generation now, Adam Khatri or whoever that, no, not Adam Dinspo, Junaid Khatri.
Dinesh.
No, Junaid
Junaid and
Khatri,
three. Okay.
who spoke, is the 10th generation of the
Oh,
Khatris.
okay.
So they have been able to, because they've been successful, they've made compromises. Most of their work is not natural indigo. Most of it is synthetic indigo. A small part of it is natural indigo. So they are able to sort of somehow, it's a successful business and they're able to manage. And
The thing about water heavy.
yeah, so Gauri, it is water heavy, but when you uh, the what you saw in Tamil Nadu, the soaking of the leaves in the water, the leaves, once all that water is kind of taken in to make the dye, the leaves also go back to the farm as manure. In every process of indigo, all the water that's used is entirely reusable, because everything that is used in the process, if you follow the traditional process, is completely ecologically friendly.
Wow, that's
Whereas
an
if you
insight.
go to synthetic dye, like for instance, near uh, near Tirupur in Tamil Nadu, which is a big textile production hub in India, and Tirupur supplies garments to the biggest brands in the world.
True.
Some years
Yeah.
ago, about 700 dye houses in Tirupur were ordered shut by the court, the High Court in Tamil Nadu. And that is because they were polluting the river. I don't know how to, it's called Noil. Is that the correct pronunciation? The Noil River. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's on the banks of the Noil, and they were dumping their effluent of the synthetic dye houses into the Noil, and the Noil had become very polluted, and farmers downstream had complained and had filed a case, and the dye houses were shut. So whether natural or synthetic, dyeing uses a lot of water,
Right.
but the water that is discharged from a synthetic dye house pollutes and poisons the land, but that is not at all the case with natural dye. In fact, with natural indigo, it's, their hands are blue and they eat with those hands.
They were actually saying also, that blue remains and all that. So, because sorry, have you finished? I was just going to start my next couple of questions. Yeah. Hello?
Yeah. I think I finished answering the questions that were here. Yeah.
For Pushpa, can we start winding up the session?
Yes, because
about 5-6 minutes are there. Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? Anyone else here? Otherwise, we are good to wind up. Yeah.
I have a couple of more.
Tanushree joined just recently.
Okay. So would she like to ask something? Would Tanushree like to ask something?
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi, Tanushree. Yeah.
Hi. How are you?
Good. Yeah. So Tanushree is based in Gujarat. So, the other couple of quick things which I wanted to ask was, Swati, if you don't mind, was about, of course, how did any of the people in the film respond to it? I mean, presumably you've shown at least some of them. And is there something they didn't want shown or they wanted specifically highlighted? I just wanted to know about that.
No, not really. They are, to them, the film is sort of quite apart. It's an other,
Okay.
I've sent it to them, and they have. I mean, the Khatris, of course, felt that that I'd concentrated far too much on. They didn't realize that they would be playing only such a small part in it.
Yeah.
But the Khatris are sort of very well known, and everybody assumes that that's where most of the indigo work happens, but that's not really.
Okay. So it was good that you connected up to the other places, right? And this history.
So in fact, if you sort of look at big brands in India that sort of sell natural indigo or claim to sell natural indigo, where do they get it from? There are only a few places in the country that make natural indigo. So, and then few others are trying to, there's Avni in Himachal, and there are now a couple of places in Bengal that are beginning, but it's all very small. The Tatas have something, but it's all very, very, very small.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, I mean, I don't want to overly romanticize this, but the Neeli Rag, the Rag part, I think I found a lot of rhythm, in the water gurgling, the way the slabs and the blocks were being sliced. So I don't know whether you got the title from something like that or some other association,
no,
but
fact,
I found this as a...
Yeah, I know. The Rag makes you think
but
of
the title
music.
means something else, right?
Yeah, it means something. It means what it says.
But I think it means...
It means deep love.
Yeah, right.
It means love that is as unfading and as deep and unfading as indigo. That's what
okay, great.
Means.
Yeah, actually,
it's a Sanskrit and a Telugu word. It's a Telugu word too. Neeli Ragam.
Yeah. I was about to say that we say Ragam and Telugu. Yeah, so that is what I just wanted to, that was more of an observation rather than, a comment on the thing. This was something which I felt, okay, as an individual. So thank you so much. Wish we had some more time, because maybe my other point was about any particular challenges or anything kind of you wanted to additionally share. I like to take the last 2 minutes on that. I want to make full use of the time because we kind of started slightly
The
late.
challenges in the making of the film?
Or any highs and lows if you wanted to share.
The making of the Indigo in Tamil Nadu, the sort of the forming of the dye was a real high for me, because it's such a it's magical almost, that you leave the leaves soaked overnight and next morning you have this color. And also the processes of dyeing, I found it sort of that meditative almost, that process of dyeing, of dipping the yarn. So I kind of really responded to that. Most of the processes I found like that, and I was fascinated by the sounds of the work. So therefore, the music of the film is actually based on the sounds of the work. That was my thing. I'm very lucky to have found somebody like Sandeep Pillai, who was as excited about making music, that where the sounds of the work, that is the rhythm he followed. So the loom, for instance, is the most dominating.
Right.
But all other sounds form that's the beat and the rhythm to which that melody has been.
Okay. Yes, kind of it
that
gels
was-
very
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much again. Thanks to everybody who
Thank you,
participated. And
Pushpa,
sorry
and,
this went
Thank you.
so quickly.
Thank you, Gauri and
Thank you.
Dilshad, and thank you, Amudan.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Swati.
you.
Really
Bye.
great.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you all. The
Bye-bye.
film will be on till tonight at 12 a.m. So please inform others. so
Yeah,
that we can-
sure.
Thank
Yeah.
you all.
All
Thank you
right.
very much.
Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Swati. Swati.
All the best.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.